Alright guys, so now we're going to start to build our custom Ajax library called Easy HTTP. Now, in order to build this, we're going to need something to test with. Okay, we're going to need a RESTful API that takes GET requests, posts, and put and delete requests in order to modify some kind of resource. So we're going to use something called JSON placeholder, which is a fake online REST API for testing and prototyping. So this is at jasonplaceholder.typecode.com. And if we go down here, you have different resources that you can work with. So posts, comments, users. We're going to work with posts. Now you can see the endpoints here. Remember we talked about endpoints or the routes that we can make. So we can make a GET request to posts. We can actually click on the link here. And it made a GET request to typecode JSON placeholder /posts, and it gives us an array of 100 different posts. Okay, you can see it goes up to post ID 100. They also have user IDs, titles, and bodies. So we can make a GET request to that URL. We can also make a post request to /posts. We can make a put request to post / and then whatever the ID of that post, and a delete request to post / whatever. We can also do patch, but we're not going to be working with patch. Now, this fake REST API, it doesn't let you actually modify data on their server. Like we can't actually add a post and then have it show up on their server here. What it does though is it returns a successful response and sends it responds with your new post. Okay, so we'll be able to see it in our application. Same with put and delete. Okay, so this is what we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it Easy HTTP. All right, and we're going to open this folder in Visual Studio Code. And we're going to have a few files here, so we need an index.html. Now we're going to need two JavaScript files. One is going to be the actual library, and then one is going to be our app.js file where we use the library. Okay, so let's create one called easyhttp.js. That will be our library, and then app.js, which we'll use to test out the library. So in the HTML file, let's put in some basic HTML tags. Title, I'm just going to say easy HTTP example. I'll just put a head on H1 in here. Everything is going to be done within the console. If you want to use this library later on to create a real application, you can of course do that. And then we need both of our script tags. Now the order is very important because we're going to be using the library in our app.js, so we want to do the library first. Okay, so we want to go like that, and then we'll do app.js underneath. Okay, so let's save that. Now we're going to go to easyhttp.js, and we're going to start to build our library. Now this is going to be an ES5 object-oriented library, so we're going to use prototypes instead of classes. Now my plan is to remake this later on with the new fetch API instead of Ajax XHR, and also use classes. So we'll make kind of an updated version of the library. But I wanted to start off with just using Ajax because I wanted to give you an example of making different types of requests, and all we've done so far is a GET request. All right. It'll also get you more familiar with prototypes, which is a good thing to know because that's what actually runs under the classes, the ES6 classes. So let's start off by creating a constructor. So we'll say const, function, and we're going to call this easy HTTP. Okay, and then the only property that we're going to have here is called HTTP, and we're going to actually set it to the XML HTTP request object. Just like that. Okay, so a lot of this code is going to be very familiar, but instead of using, just XHR like we were doing, we would have XHR, and then we do XHR open, XHR onload. Instead of that, we'll be using this .http.onload dot open, things like that. All right, now we're going to have 4 different prototype methods. So we'll have our get. So let's say make an HTTP get request. Let's go ahead and 4 of those in there. Okay, so we're going to do get, we're going to do post, put, and delete. Okay, so let's start off with get. So we'll say easy HTTP dot prototype dot get and set that to function. All right, now this is going to take in a URL. We don't want to hard code the URL. We want the user to be able to pass it in when they use the library. And we're going to be passing this in. I'm sorry, this. But they might want to use this with a different API. So we're going to say this.http.open, just like we would have done XHR open if we weren't using object-oriented programming. And we're going to pass in the type of request, which is get, the URL, and then true. Okay, this is asynchronous. And then down at the bottom, we want to say this.http.send. Okay. And then we want to do our onload. So this.http.onload equals function. All right, so what do we usually do when we call our onload? We usually check to see if the status is 200. Now, what I'm going to put in here initially is not going to work, okay? And I'm going to show you after why it doesn't work. So let's say if this.http.status is equal to 200, then let's just do a console.log of this.http.response text. Okay, all this should look familiar. So let's save that and let's work with this. So we'll go to app.js, and in app.js we're going to need to instantiate HTTP. Well, that's what we'll call it. We're going to instantiate easy HTTP. All right, and then we're going to do, say, get posts. Oops. So HTTP, and we have our get prototype function. And we're going to pass in the URL, which is going to be this right here. All right, so let's save that and let's see what we get. So I'm going to just start the server here with live server. Actually, we need to do it from the HTML. Okay, let's open up our console. And we're getting cannot read property status of undefined. Let's see, I did something wrong here. Oh, no, this is what I was talking about. The reason that if we look at status, let's look at the error message. Status of undefined. So this right here is undefined in this case. Now, this.http is not undefined here, or here, or here, but it is here. And the reason for that is because it's in this function. When you're inside a function, the this keyword pertains to that function. So it's in a different scope right here. Now, we haven't talked about arrow functions yet, which are a part of ES6. And arrow functions actually fix this by adding what's called a lexical this. All right, so I don't want to go over arrow functions just yet, but just to show you real quick, if I were to use an arrow function and save, it works. Okay, it actually gets the data for us. Now, I'm going to go back to using just a standard function here, and it doesn't. So a common way to fix this in ES5 without using arrow functions is to set another variable such as self. It's usually called self, or some people call it that. But we would set self equal to this, okay, so that we can capture that this in this scope. And then down here, instead of saying this, we can say self because it pertains to this scope. Okay, same thing here. Anywhere where you would use this, we would change to self and save, and now you can see it works. Okay, so we're actually now getting the posts. Now we're able to console log our response. Okay, now you may think that what we can do is return self.http.response text and then go back to our app.js and set const posts equals that, and then console.log posts, like that. You may think that that would work, but it doesn't. We get undefined. Now, what's happening here is similar to what we did in the last video, in the callback. Was it the last video? The one with callbacks, where it was returned, the data was returned before it was actually added. And that's similar to what's going on here. So the way that we fix this is with a callback, okay, just like we did in that video. So instead of doing this in a synchronous way like this, we want to instead, actually let's go to our library first, then the get prototype, in addition to taking a URL, is going to take a callback. Okay, and then down here, instead of just returning it like this, what we want to do is say callback and then pass in that response text. Okay, that way we can go back to app.js and we don't even have to do any of this, assigning this to a variable. We can just now pass in a callback, so we can say function, and that will actually give us the response. Okay, and then we'll just console.log response and save, and there we go. So now we're getting it back. Okay, so we're now doing this asynchronously with a callback. And you can call this right here whatever you want. It's going to be whatever this is, but you can call it here whatever you want. I mean, if you want to call it post, that probably makes more sense, like that. And you can format what you send back however you want as well. Now, what I want to do is, instead of just sending back the response, I also want to send back an error if there is one. And you'll see that you've probably seen this a lot if you've worked with like Node.js. So we're going to say null for the error. Okay, I want error to be the first parameter that's passed back, and then the response to be the second. Now, in this if statement here, I want to put an else. So if it's not 200, then I want to say callback, and then for the first parameter, we're going to say error, and then we'll just concatenate on self.http, and then it has a property called status, okay, which is whatever this is going to be. All right, and that way, if it's, for instance, a 404, it'll send that back as in the callback. Okay, and we don't need to send anything else because it'll just be the error. Now, since we're sending this null, this error parameter first, and then the response, we need to edit where we use this. So now it's going to take error and then posts. Okay, so if we save, it still works. All right, now what you would do in this situation is test for the error. Okay, so we'll say if error, then let's go ahead and just console.log. I keep doing that, assert. And we'll log the error, else, then we'll log the posts. All right, so that still works. Now, if I were to change this to something that gave us back a 404 error or some other kind of error, like let's say /post1, not /1, but just post1, that should not work. So we'll save, and we get back, of course, we get the browser error, but we also get back an error from our library that says error 404. All right, and you can handle it however you want. But let's put that back, and now we're just fetching our posts. All right, so we've created the first method for our easy HTTP library, and you can see that this is a lot easier for people to use than having to do the whole open, onload, testing the status, send, all that stuff. So this is the purpose of having a library, much like jQuery, where you make something that makes things easier. All right, so in the next video, we're going to continue on with this library, and we're going to create a post method so that we can make a post request to our fake REST API.